The discovery of the Deathworld. The explorers had never seen anything like it. Their ship, the Resolute, drifted silently through the cold, empty expanse of space, heading toward a distant, mysterious planet. It wasn't supposed to be important. In fact, it wasn't even on their maps. But then they had picked up a strange signal, one that had been out there for decades, and no one knew what it was. The signal was coming from a planet marked only as Class 15, and no one had dared to explore it. Class 15, a highest rating for a Deathworld, a place so hostile that most species wouldn't even attempt to land on it. Class 15 Deathworlds were the universe's true dangers. Violent storms, terrifying creatures, dangerous terrain. Everything about such a world was a death sentence. No living being could survive there. Or so they thought. The crew on board the Resolute had been trained for dangerous missions. They had been to planets where deadly predators roamed, and they had dealt with hostile alien species, but even they were cautious as they approached the unknown world. Their eyes were glued to the monitors, watching for any signs of immediate danger. "Prepare for entry," said Captain Lyra, her voice calm but with a tinge of uncertainty. The crew members exchanged uneasy glances. Even the veteran explorers felt the tension. This was uncharted territory. No one had ever been this close to a Class 15 Deathworld and survived to tell the tale. As the Resolute descended through the planet's thick atmosphere, the crew was met with a sky darkened by swirling clouds. The surface below was jagged, broken, and full of craters. Massive volcanoes spewed thick black smoke into the air, and the ground trembled with the power of earthquakes. Even through the thick atmosphere, the planet seemed alive, as if it was constantly fighting back against anything that dared to land. "Class 15, no doubt about it," said one of the crew members, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. "It's a hellhole." But then something strange happened. The sensors began to pick up unusual readings. The planet's magnetic field seemed to be fluctuating in patterns that didn't match the expected chaos of a Class 15 world. There was an order to it, and as the Resolute got closer to the surface, the crew saw something that made them stop in their tracks. "Captain, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Jarrow, his voice filled with disbelief. Captain Lyra stepped over to his console, and together they stared at the holographic map of the surface. There, in the middle of the planet's most dangerous region, was a small patch of green, an oasis perfectly out of place in the surrounding wasteland. And not just that. There were structures, buildings, strong and tall, scattered across the landscape. Humans had built them. "This can't be possible," Captain Lyra murmured. "How could anyone survive here?" The crew scrambled to analyze the data. The structures didn't match anything from the civilizations they had studied. They were advanced, far more advanced than anything they had seen on planets in the region. But that wasn't what bothered the crew the most. What really bothered them was that there were no signs of alien life, no trace of any species that could have built these structures, just humans. "It looks like a colony," Lieutenant Jarrow said, his voice shaky. "But how? The planet was supposed to be a death trap. Nothing could survive there, especially not an organized colony. And yet, here they were, clear signs of life. No one knew how long it had been here or who was responsible, but the crew was faced with a chilling question. Why hadn't they heard about it before? "Activate the long-range scanners," Captain Lyra ordered. The crew set to work, eager to find out more about this mysterious colony. The scanners beeped as they sent out a signal, trying to catch any signs of life. What they found was both thrilling and terrifying. There were humans on the surface, alive, but they weren't just hiding. The scans revealed signs of active communication, power sources, and even heat signatures from machinery. This wasn't a hidden, forgotten outpost. It was a thriving colony. "Are they hostile?" Captain Lyra asked, her voice serious. "We don't know," Jarrow replied, his fingers tapping away at his console. "But the readings suggest they've adapted to this world. Somehow, the crew sat in stunned silence. They had never considered the possibility that humanity could have established a presence on such a dangerous planet. It was unthinkable. The crew had been trained to expect the worst when dealing with hostile planets. But this was something else entirely. The planet that was supposed to be uninhabitable had become a home. As the ship moved closer to the surface, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into a world far beyond their understanding. A world where humanity, against all odds, had not only survived, but thrived. "Prepare for landing," Captain Lyra said quietly, her gaze locked on the strange, green oasis below. The adventure was just beginning. But already, the explorers knew one thing for certain. They were about to uncover a secret that would change everything they knew about survival in the galaxy. What they would discover next would shock them to their core. The first encounter. As the Resolute descended further toward the surface of the planet, a sense of uncertainty gripped the crew. They had no idea what to expect. Had humanity truly conquered this deadly world, or was it a trap set by unknown forces? The calm before the storm felt heavy, and the crew's unease was palpable. Their ship descended through the thick atmosphere, which was filled with strange electromagnetic readings. It felt as if the planet itself was watching them. Captain Lyra was at the helm, her hand steady, but her mind racing. The crew had been trained for many situations, but this was something entirely different. The scanner showed signs of human life on the surface, yet they were still unsure whether the humans were friend or foe. The ship's engines hummed as they entered the lower atmosphere, slowly circling the small patch of green land surrounded by the harsh, barren terrain. "Captain, the landing site is ahead," Lieutenant Jarrow reported. His voice was tight, but he spoke with the certainty of a man who had been through the worst and still lived to tell the tale. "Lock in the coordinates," Lyra responded. "Prepare for landing. Everyone stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." The Resolute touched down gently on the flat, rocky surface, its thrusters emitting a soft hiss as they powered down. The crew disembarked, cautious but determined. They were surrounded by the eerie silence of the Deathworld, where the winds howled and the ground shook beneath their feet. The smell of sulfur hung in the air, and the atmosphere was thick, almost suffocating. The explorers gathered their gear and stepped out of the ship, their boots crunching on the rocky ground. Captain Lyra took the lead, her senses on high alert. Every sound felt magnified, every shadow seemed to hide something dangerous. They moved slowly, sticking together in tight formation. As they ventured deeper into the colony's outskirts, they could see more clearly the human structures that seemed impossibly intact despite the devastation around them. Stone buildings, reinforced with metal and strange materials, stood proudly in the midst of the hostile environment. The windows glowed with a soft, warm light, proof of life, a sign that the colony was active. "This is impossible," muttered Sergeant Kale, one of the more seasoned members of the crew. "How can they survive here?" "We need answers," Captain Lyra said, her voice firm. "Keep moving." As they made their way through the abandoned streets, they spotted something that made their hearts race. A group of humans, alive and seemingly unbothered by the planet's harsh conditions. The humans were working, hauling large containers into the buildings, tending to plants in small patches of soil, and even working on machinery that hummed with power. At first, the explorers stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Were these humans the survivors of some long-forgotten mission, or had they somehow made this world their own? The explorers had never expected to find anything like this. It didn't make sense. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind them. "Can I help you?" The crew spun around, startled by the sound. A woman stood just a few feet away, her clothes a mix of tough, weathered fabrics and pieces of high-tech armor. She was calm, unthreatened by their presence, and her eyes were focused and sharp, as if she had been expecting them all along. Captain Lyra stepped forward cautiously, raising a hand in greeting. "We mean no harm. We came to investigate. We found signs of human life on this planet. but it's supposed to be uninhabitable. The woman studied them for a long moment, then smiled faintly. It used to be, she said simply, but we made it our own. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The explorers exchanged confused glances. How could humans have settled on a planet so dangerous? How had they survived? The woman motioned for them to follow her. Come with me. I'll show you what we've built. The group followed her into one of the buildings, which turned out to be a communal hub, a sort of gathering place for the colony's residents. Inside, there was a mix of human activity. People were repairing equipment, studying maps, and preparing food. It looked nothing like the devastated ruins they had expected to find on a Class 15 Deathworld. Instead, it was a place full of life and purpose. Humans have been here for centuries, the woman continued, her tone matter-of-fact. We came here looking for resources, just like anyone else. But we found something different. We found that this planet, despite its dangers, was full of opportunity. The creatures, the weather, it all pushed us to become better, stronger, and now, it's home. The explorers stood in stunned silence. They had been prepared to face a hostile species or an abandoned outpost. What they hadn't expected was to find a thriving human civilization, one that had not only survived the Class 15 Deathworld, but had made it their home. How did you do this? Jaro asked, his voice filled with awe. The woman smiled again, but there was no arrogance in her expression. We adapted. We didn't let the planet defeat us. We learned its secrets, its weaknesses, and we used them to our advantage. Now we control this world. It's our world. As the crew absorbed this information, the weight of the situation began to settle in. Humanity, against all odds, had conquered one of the deadliest planets in the galaxy, and what the explorers had thought was an impossible mission to unravel had turned into an entirely different kind of mystery. They had come to explore, but what they found was a society that had already done what they thought was impossible. They had turned a Deathworld into a thriving human empire. And now, they were standing in the heart of it, on the very ground that had been once considered uninhabitable. The real question now was, what did humanity's success mean for the rest of the galaxy? Unraveling the mystery. The explorers stood in the heart of the human colony, still in disbelief over what they had just learned. The woman who had greeted them, now introduced as Captain Serena, motioned for them to follow her deeper into the colony. As they moved through the narrow streets, past busy workers and thriving structures, it became clear that the humans here were not just surviving. They were thriving. Everything about the colony was a contradiction. The surrounding environment was one of the most dangerous in the galaxy, yet the colony was bustling with life. The weather, the beasts, the Earth itself, all of it should have made it impossible for any species to settle here, yet humanity had not just settled, they had conquered. Serena led them into a large central building that looked more like a command center than anything they had seen before. Inside, large screens showed maps of the planet's surface, reading equipment that tracked seismic activity, and holographic displays of animals and ecosystems. It was a far cry from the simple shelters the explorers had expected. There was technology here far more advanced than they had thought possible for a world so hostile. This is where we've been studying the planet, Serena explained, her voice calm, but filled with the pride of someone who had worked tirelessly to create something from nothing. We've been mapping the entire planet, understanding every part of it. The dangers, the terrain, the creatures. They've all become part of our strategy. And that's how we survived. The explorers exchanged glances, still trying to make sense of it all. This wasn't just a human settlement. It was a fully functioning civilization, built to withstand the most lethal environment imaginable. How did you manage to adapt? Captain Lyra asked. This planet has Class 15 ratings for a reason. The environment here is lethal. Serena nodded, as if the question was one she had answered 100 times. At first, we didn't know if we'd make it. When the first ships arrived, they didn't last long. The planet fought back with everything it had. The storms, the creatures, the terrain, it all tried to kill us. But we learned. Over time, we adapted. We studied the planet's rhythms, understood how its creatures lived, how the weather patterns shifted. We found ways to use the planet's harshness to our advantage. Use it to your advantage? Jaro asked skeptically. How? I've seen the reports. The planet has creatures that can tear apart ships in minutes, not to mention the storms. How could anyone learn to live with that? Serena smiled, but it wasn't a smile of arrogance. It was a smile of quiet confidence. We didn't just survive by fighting. We learned to work with the planet. We studied its beasts, how they hunt, how they navigate their territories. We began to understand that the planet's violence wasn't just random. It was predictable. In a way, the planet had rules. And once we figured those rules out, we could manipulate them. We built defenses and learned how to build safe zones. We learned how to farm in soil that should have been too toxic for any plant to grow. Impossible, Sergeant Kale muttered under his breath. Serena turned to him, eyes sharp. Nothing is impossible if you're willing to pay the price. But you're right. It wasn't easy. It took time, sacrifice, and a lot of losses. But over generations, humanity began to thrive here. We even found ways to control some of the more dangerous creatures, using them to help us with tasks that would otherwise be impossible. The explorers listened in stunned silence. The idea that humanity could not only survive but flourish on such a death trap of a planet was almost beyond belief. They had seen the technology, they had seen the weapons and buildings, but hearing it from Serena herself made it real. Why didn't anyone else know about this? Lyra asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Why keep it a secret? Serena's expression grew more serious. We didn't keep it a secret because we wanted to. The first settlers came to this world with one goal, resources. But as we settled, as we grew, we found that the rest of the galaxy wouldn't understand. They wouldn't believe us. They would have tried to take what we've built, maybe even destroy it. So we stayed hidden. For our protection. Over time, we kept ourselves off the radar, blending into the galaxy's noise. But now, Lyra asked, why reveal yourselves now? Serena sighed, because the galaxy is changing. Things are growing more dangerous out there. The resources here, the technology we've developed, it could help the galaxy, but we can't do it alone. We need allies. It's time for humanity to show the galaxy what we've become. The explorers looked around at one another. They had come here expecting to find something akin to a forgotten outpost or a last-ditch attempt to survive. What they found was a fully formed, highly advanced society. But more than that, they found a people who had transformed their greatest challenge into their greatest strength. The Resolute crew now had a decision to make. Would they leave this planet behind, or would they share its secrets with the galaxy? Would they take what they had learned back to their leaders and risk drawing the attention of enemies who could threaten this fragile new human empire? Whatever they decided, one thing was certain. Humanity's potential was far beyond anything they had imagined, and that knowledge would change the future of the galaxy. But the question still lingered in the back of their minds. What other secrets did this world hold? The truth revealed. As the explorers continued their tour of the colony, Serena led them to a large, heavily fortified building nestled on the edge of the settlement. The building stood like a fortress against the dangers of the planet. Its walls were thick, reinforced with metal and unknown materials that seemed impervious to the harsh conditions outside. "This is our central command," Serena said, her voice steady and proud. "It's where we coordinate everything, from farming to defense, and where we make decisions that affect the whole colony." The crew followed Serena inside, where they were greeted by maps and plans stretching across multiple walls, some detailing every part of the planet's surface, while others showed advanced weapon systems and technologies they could barely comprehend. Human ingenuity had turned what seemed like a hopeless situation into an empire that could rival any in the galaxy. Serena walked over to a large table where holographic displays were set up, showing detailed images of the planet's deadly wildlife. Creatures that had once been the greatest threat to human survival. Some of them were massive, with scales that could deflect even the most advanced weapons. Others had evolved to hunt in packs, using a combination of speed, strength, and intelligence to overwhelm their prey. "We've come to understand these creatures," Serena explained as she gestured to the holograms. "At first, they were a threat, but we learned their patterns, their weaknesses. We didn't just fight them, we studied them, and we found ways to use their abilities to our advantage." Captain Lyra's eyes narrowed. "You're saying that you've somehow tamed these creatures, turned them into tools for survival?" Serena nodded. "Not just tamed, but in some cases, we've formed symbiotic relationships. For example, the alpha raptors in the northern range. They're terrifying when encountered in the wild, but we've learned to harness their strength, using them as part of our defense systems. We train them to protect our borders from the larger predators, which has drastically reduced our losses." The explorers were silent. The very idea that humans had learned to work alongside such dangerous creatures was astounding. It was like something out of a legend. But this was no legend. It was reality. "We've also learned how to manipulate the planet's environment," Serena continued, tapping a few buttons on the table to show new holographic images. "The storms that seem so destructive, they're actually predictable. We've built shields that protect our settlements from the worst of them, and we use the energy generated from those storms to power our cities." Captain Lyra was amazed. "This is incredible. You've not only survived, but you've made this world your own." Serena smiled. "That's the thing, Captain. We didn't just survive. We conquered it. We've become part of this planet, its ecosystem, its rhythms. We've learned how to be its masters, not its victims." The crew began to realize just how much humanity had accomplished on this seemingly impossible planet. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, about using the very dangers that would have killed any other species as stepping stones toward success. The real question now was how humanity had reached this level of power. How had they gone from struggling against the planet's deadly forces to mastering it? What had driven them to this point? Serena seemed to sense their thoughts. "You're probably wondering how we got here. How we became so strong. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. When we first arrived, we were just like any other species exploring the galaxy. We came for resources, for a new place to settle, but we had no idea what we were getting into. We were unprepared," she continued, her voice somber now. "We landed thinking we could conquer the planet with our technology, but the planet fought back with everything it had. We lost many ships, many people. At first, we thought we might not make it. But then something changed. We stopped fighting the planet, and we started listening to it." "What do you mean?" Jaro asked, clearly intrigued. Serena's gaze hardened. "The turning point came when we realized we had to change our mindset. We weren't going to defeat this planet through sheer force. We had to become part of it. We learned to understand its creatures, its storms, its natural rhythms. And once we did, we started to adapt, to evolve, just like the planet itself." Captain Lyra's eyes widened. "So, you're saying humanity evolved to survive here?" Serena nodded. "Not in the traditional sense. It wasn't about changing our biology. It was about changing our mentality. We learned how to use the environment, to live with it, instead of fighting against it. And with time, we became a part of the planet's ecosystem. We didn't just survive. We thrived." As the crew absorbed this information, they realized just how extraordinary the situation was. Humanity hadn't simply adapted to the planet. It had transformed, not just physically but mentally and culturally. They had reshaped their entire approach to survival, and in doing so, had created a society that was as powerful as it was resilient. "You say you've become part of the ecosystem," Captain Lyra said slowly. "But is it possible that humanity is now a dominant force here, that you've become the predators. Serena's expression softened, but there was a flicker of pride in her eyes. Yes, we are the apex predators on this world. But we don't see ourselves as conquerors. We see ourselves as protectors. The creatures here, the land, it's all part of the same delicate balance. We don't rule through fear. We rule through understanding. And that's how we keep the peace. The explorers were left in awe of what humanity had accomplished on this Class 15 Deathworld. What they had assumed was an impossible place for survival had been transformed into a flourishing civilization, a testament to humanity's resilience and ingenuity. But as they stood there, taking in the magnitude of what Serena had shared, they couldn't help but wonder. If humanity had conquered such a dangerous world, what could they do when faced with the rest of the galaxy? And more importantly, what would the rest of the galaxy do when they learned what humanity had achieved? The hidden power of humanity. As the explorers continued to absorb the staggering revelations about humanity's success on the Class 15 Deathworld, the magnitude of it all began to sink in. The humans here hadn't just survived. They had become part of the very fabric of the planet. They had mastered the deadly environment, turned its most terrifying features into advantages, and built an empire from the rubble. The crew had been trained for countless encounters with alien species, hostile environments, and galactic wars, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for what they were witnessing. They had come to this planet expecting a simple exploration mission, maybe to find a struggling colony, or at worst, an abandoned outpost. What they found was far more than they had bargained for. This was a new kind of human empire, a model of resilience, ingenuity, and strength that stretched far beyond anything they had seen before. Serena led them through the heart of the colony to a massive underground facility, one that appeared to be the true center of their power. The walls were lined with advanced technology, some of which the explorers could barely identify. In the center of the room was a large, circular platform that appeared to be a hub for energy production. The air crackled with power, and the faint hum of machinery filled the space. This, Serena explained, was where the majority of the planet's energy was harvested, not from external sources, but from the planet itself. This is the key to our survival, Serena explained as she walked toward the platform. The planet is full of energy, geothermal, electromagnetic, and kinetic. We tap into that energy and use it to power everything we need. It's what allows us to grow our food, build our homes, and protect ourselves from the dangers of this world. The explorers exchanged glances, their awe growing. The humans had managed to harness the planet's destructive power and use it for their benefit. They had become one with the planet, not just in terms of their survival, but in terms of their progress. Serena continued, "Over the years, we've learned how to manipulate the planet's storms. They used to be a deadly force, but now we use them to generate power. We've also learned to tap into the planet's magnetic field, which is stronger than anything we've seen elsewhere. It's like the planet itself is alive, and we've learned how to work with it." "Unbelievable," Captain Lyra muttered under her breath, still trying to process everything they had learned. She looked around the room at the advanced technologies, the kind of tech they would expect from an interstellar empire, not a small colony on a hostile world. "The technology here," Jarrow said, his voice filled with awe, "it's beyond anything we've seen. How did you manage to develop all of this? I mean, this isn't just survival. You've built an entire infrastructure." Serena nodded, her face thoughtful. "It wasn't easy, but necessity is the mother of invention. We had to learn. We adapted. We had no choice. There were moments when it seemed like we'd never make it. But now we've reached a point where we not only survive, but we're a force in this galaxy." The crew stood in silence, realizing the enormity of the situation. The humans had evolved beyond simply surviving the Deathworld. They had turned it into a thriving civilization that had harnessed the planet's very power. They had become an unstoppable force, and it was clear that no one had ever expected them to achieve this level of success. "Do you really think the galaxy is ready for this?" Captain Lyra asked. Her voice was both impressed and concerned. What you've done here, it's incredible. But the galaxy isn't a kind place. If the rest of the universe finds out about this, you'll have enemies. Powerful ones. Serena's expression grew serious. We've been ready for that. We've stayed hidden for a reason. But now things are changing. The galaxy is becoming more unstable. There are wars, power struggles, and threats from all sides. We've been monitoring everything closely. Our technology, our resources. It could change the balance of power in the galaxy. We're not the only ones who know about this planet, but we're the only ones who have learned how to survive here. So, you're not just staying hidden anymore? Jaro asked, his tone cautious. No, Serena replied, a steely determination in her voice. It's time for humanity to step out into the galaxy. We can't remain in the shadows forever. The galaxy needs what we have, and we're ready to show them what we can do. But we need allies. The right kind of allies. The explorers were stunned. The implication was clear. Humanity had already built a power base on this deadly world, and now they were preparing to extend their influence beyond it. They had the technology, the resources, and the will to change the course of galactic history. But with that power came risks. Serena was right. The galaxy wasn't kind to those who upset the established order. We can help you, Captain Lyra said slowly. We can bring this to the attention of the right people, the ones who would understand the potential of what you've built here. But we'll have to be careful. The wrong hands could destroy everything. Serena nodded. We know the risks. That's why we've kept ourselves hidden for so long. But things are changing. The time for secrets is over. The crew's decision now seemed clear. They had stumbled upon something far greater than they had ever anticipated. The humans of this Class 15 Deathworld had done the impossible, and now they were preparing to share their power with the galaxy, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. And as the explorers stood in that underground facility, surrounded by the hum of power and the promise of a new future, one thing was certain. Humanity had changed the rules. They had gone from the weakest species on a planet of death to the strongest, most resilient force in the galaxy. But with power came danger, and the explorers knew that whatever came next would reshape the galaxy forever. The true question now was, would the galaxy accept humanity's strength, or would they fear it? A deadly test. The decision had been made. Humanity was no longer content to remain hidden on their Class 15 Deathworld, and they intended to step into the galaxy's wider stage. But before any of that could happen, they needed to prove that they could hold their ground, that their strength wasn't just a myth, and that the galaxy would respect, rather than fear, their newfound power. Serena had one final challenge for the resolute crew before they could move forward with their mission. A survival test in the most dangerous part of the planet. A part of the world that even the seasoned human colonists treated with the utmost respect. This wasn't just a test of strength or technology. It was a test of will, adaptability, and understanding of the planet's true nature. The explorers were hesitant at first. They had already seen the planet's most dangerous beasts, massive predators, terrifying storms, and an ecosystem that seemed determined to destroy any who entered. But now, Serena wanted them to experience firsthand what it meant to survive in a world that required more than just advanced weaponry and technology. This part of the world is where even the best of us go to prove ourselves, Serena explained. Only those who understand this planet's rhythm can make it through alive. You won't be alone. You'll have our guidance, but the rest is up to you. You'll need to rely on what you've learned here. Captain Lyra felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The very thought of entering this part of the world was unnerving. If it had been dangerous for humans to navigate, how would a group of explorers from a distant planet survive? But they had come all this way for a reason. They had to see for themselves if humanity's claims were true. If they could conquer the impossible, then perhaps their technology, their resilience, could indeed shift the balance of the galaxy. The test site was located in the wildest, most unpredictable part of the planet, the Veil of Fangs, a vast expanse filled with colossal beasts, toxic marshes, and unpredictable seismic shifts. No one who entered the Veil came out the same. Some didn't come out at all. The humans had learned to survive here by understanding the planet's natural patterns and using their knowledge to avoid the worst of the dangers. As the explorers descended into the Veil, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air was thick with humidity, and a strange, sulfuric scent filled their noses. Every step they took sent vibrations through the ground, and the distant growls of unseen creatures echoed through the forested valley. The trees were monstrous, their roots twisted and knotted like serpents, and overhead, the sky was dark and swirling with storm clouds. "This is it," Serena said, her voice calm but filled with quiet authority. "Stay close. Don't stray from the path. The Veil is alive, and it's watching." The crew moved cautiously, their eyes darting from shadow to shadow. They knew the rules of the game, understand the planet's rhythm, adapt and survive. It wasn't about outfighting the planet. It was about learning to flow with it. But that didn't make it any easier. They had only gone a few hundred meters into the Veil when they saw their first challenge. A massive winged creature with scales as hard as steel, flying low through the trees. The explorers froze. It was an alpha thrasher, one of the deadliest predators in the Veil, capable of tearing apart anything that moved. The creature's yellow eyes locked onto the group. Its roar reverberated through the ground, sending vibrations that rattled the explorers' bones. But instead of attacking, the thrasher merely circled, studying them. Serena stepped forward slowly, as though she had done this 100 times before. "It's not hunting us," she said quietly. "It's testing us. Stay still." The crew followed her lead, their hearts pounding in their chests. The thrasher hovered for a moment longer before it suddenly darted away, disappearing into the thick foliage. The explorers exhaled in unison. "That's just a warning," Serena said. "The Veil doesn't just throw dangers at you, it makes you think. If you can prove you're not a threat, it won't kill you. At least, not yet." The explorers were shaken but pressed on. They had seen the power of the creatures on this planet, and they had to admit, it was something they had never encountered before. The planet wasn't just trying to kill them, it was teaching them. But how far would it take this lesson? And would they survive long enough to finish it? They traveled further, deeper into the Veil. The landscape shifted from dense forest to a series of rocky cliffs and narrow ravines. It was here that the true test began. A massive storm, one that had been brewing in the distance, began to approach. The winds picked up, tearing through the trees with a fury that the crew nodded. They knew the stakes were higher now. The galaxy was not kind to those who challenged the status quo, and humanity's success on this Deathworld could send shockwaves across the galaxy. But the resolute crew had already seen the potential of what humanity had built. They had learned to adapt, to thrive in the harshest conditions, and they were determined to help humanity take its place on the galactic stage. "Do you think the galaxy will accept us?" Jaro asked, his voice heavy with the weight of the question. Serena's expression hardened, and for a moment, it seemed as though she wasn't speaking to the crew, but to the entire galaxy itself. "The galaxy will either learn to accept humanity's strength, or it will try to crush it. We're not afraid of either, but we won't be passive in how we approach the future. We've built something here, something that has the power to change everything." The explorers had seen the evidence themselves. The technology, the power, the knowledge. Humanity had gone from surviving on a planet no one thought possible to becoming a dominating force on that very world. Now they were ready to extend that influence into the wider galaxy. But that meant facing risks, galactic powers that might see humanity as a threat, or worse, as competition. It would not be easy, but Serena's words were a reminder that humanity was no longer the weak underdog they had once been. They were strong, resilient, and ready to fight for their place in the universe. Captain Lyra stood up, her decision clear. "We'll take your story back to the Council. We'll show them what you've built here. They'll understand the potential. We'll do everything we can to help humanity take its rightful place among the stars." Serena's eyes softened, a rare look of gratitude crossing her face. "I trust you, Captain. But understand this, if we take this step, there's no going back. We will change the course of history. And that means every action, every decision, will echo across the galaxy." The crew of the Resolute looked at one another, their resolve firming. They had come to this planet expecting to uncover secrets. What they had found was humanity's strength, resilience, and potential, a force that could reshape the future of the galaxy. As they made their way back to the ship, ready to return to their home and share the incredible truth of what they had discovered, they realized that humanity was no longer the underdog. They had conquered the impossible, and now they were ready to stand tall. The galaxy might fear them, might even try to resist their power. But humanity had already won the most important battle, the battle for survival on the most deadly planet known to the galaxy. Now, the galaxy would have to face the consequences of humanity's victory. And as the Resolute lifted off from the surface of the Deathworld, the explorers understood one undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer just surviving in the galaxy. They were ruling it. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had already conquered the impossible, and now they were ready to conquer the stars.